Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning for you guys on the West Coast. I'm just going to wait a little while longer while the attendees begin to come in, and then we'll get started. You're here today to talk about beginning the dialogue about recovery-oriented practice. With me, I'm Edie Schwartz from the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. We'll just wait another couple of minutes as people come on board, and then we'll get started. So, welcome everyone, and good morning to you in Washington State. I am here in New York State in the lower Hudson Valley on what's a cold but beautiful day, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon for me, and I guess it's 10 o'clock in the morning for you. So it's really nice to have you here first thing in the morning, and today we're going to speak about beginning to think about what recovery-oriented practice might be and how we might attain it. Julie, could you advance my slide? It doesn't seem to want to go. So we're starting off with some tech problems. I apologize for that. We'll try again after this one. So who are we? We are the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, known as NIAPRS, and we've been doing some work with Patty Marshall and your folks over in Washington State, and we've been to your state hospitals and worked with some of the clinicians and peers who work there. And we've been, I've been there myself to both Spokane and to Lakewood, and it's been lovely to meet a whole lot of you, and I've really enjoyed my work with you. We've also sent over a team of folks who've worked with the peers in the state hospitals and some of the other places where you work, and Harvey Rosenthal has come with a number of people as well. And the reason that we're there is because NIAPRS is a peer-run partnership and state and national change agent. And we're dedicated to improving services, social conditions, and policies for people with mental health and trauma-related conditions. And what we do is we promote recovery, rehabilitation, and rights, and really support full community inclusion and integration. And we do this through three mechanisms. We advocate and we demonstrate by providing direct peer-to-peer services, and we educate, which is where I come in. I'm the Director of Systems Transformation, and what I do is, with my staff, we go throughout New York State and also around the country, and we talk about what recovery is and what recovery-oriented services can look like. And so that's why we're here with you today, and this is being recorded, so it will be available for you as a link, and any of the other folks out in your facilities can look at it as well at a date that's good for them. I'm going to try to advance this slide one more time. And of course, it doesn't work. So, Julie, I guess you're going to have to advance my slides. Thank you. So today we hope to do a few things. We hope first to really talk about the different kinds of definitions of recovery, because recovery means a whole lot of things to different people, and it has a whole lot of different ways that it's talked about. So we're going to talk about multiple definitions of recovery, and then we're going to look at the parts of our practice that are recovery-oriented, and maybe those that could use a little tweaking to become more recovery-oriented. And then we're going to reflect on how our personal motivation and beliefs can either help or hinder this capacity to deliver the kind of services we want to deliver, ones that are truly recovery-oriented. And then I'm going to share with you a method that I learned long ago to assess readiness to engage in practice change. Because a lot of times when people don't move forward, it isn't that they're being resistant, it's that they're not ready for that change. And so we're going to look a little bit at how you might really talk with someone to find out whether they are ready to make that change or not. And then we're going to explore ways that we can adapt our practice to deliver more recovery-focused interventions. Julie? Next slide. Great. So I want you to take a look over on the right side of your screen, and there are two, or it may be over the top or bottom of your screen, depending upon how you're viewing this. There's a place where you can chat, and there's a place where you can write questions. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be asking you a few things to think about, and I'd love for you to just write them into the chat box. And that chat box should then go to the whole audience and share some beliefs of what we're talking about. So let's begin to look at how we're going to offer services and take a minute to reflect on a few things. So what do you believe recovery to mean? And let's think a little bit about not only what it is, but what it's not. And is it the same or different from treatment or rehabilitation? What do you think? There's no wrong answers. So just feel free to write anything in that that you think might be meaningful. So, what is recovery? Is it someone getting the job? Is it someone not having a symptom? What is it? What is it, and why is it different from treatment? I always say that in order for us to move on a recovery journey, we need treatment, rehabilitation, and self-help. We need everything. So what do you think? How is it the same, or how is it different from treatment? Any ideas? I've got a shy audience today. All right, so I think that that these are questions that we ask ourselves, and we wonder what they are, and let's see if they can unfold as we move forward. Julie, next slide, please. So here's a few definitions of recovery. Do it again. Some of the definitions of recovery imply something like cure, and that would be very clinical. It's about symptom remission, that person doesn't need medication anymore, or that person has returned to the way that they functioned before they were seeking help. Once more, please. We look at recovery a little bit differently. We look at it as SAMHSA looks at it. A process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. This is way more of a look-see at what a human being is than just a bundle of symptoms that need to be reduced. We know that people function all the time with symptoms of all kinds of things, of physical as well as behavioral challenges. We know that symptoms and medication is not the only way to look at recovery. That really it's about someone returning to a life of health and wellness and a life that's meaningful to them. I keep trying to change these slides to no avail. So Julie, next slide, please. For research, recovery is looked at differently. It's looked as an outcome, and it's usually looked at something that will sustain itself for at least 2 years. So in research studies, they're looking at recovery around symptom remission, but they're also looking at it as engagement in an instrumental role, such as a worker or a student or a mother or father. It's also looked at as living independently of supervision by your support network. And so someone who has moved from needing that support to being able to act independently. And it's also looked at as someone who can participate in active relationships or age-appropriate peer relationships. So those are a few research criteria. Next slide, please. And there are 4 major dimensions that we look at for a life in recovery. And these dimensions are health, home, purpose, and community. And think of these things for yourself, not just for the people that you work with. Think of it as the things that are meaningful in your life. So for health, it's overcoming any kind of challenges that we may have and making healthy choices that support wellness and emotional well-being. Home is something also that's important, to be stable and safe. None of us can go ahead with other kinds of things if we don't live in a stable and safe place. Purpose is something that's important for everyone. Why is work so important? It gives us purpose. Parenting gives us purpose. Relationship gives us purpose. Doing something good for the world gives us purpose. So it's jobs, school, volunteering, family, music, art. These are things that give us purpose and that give us meaning, make meaning in our life. And community, which is, we're not solo people. We're not alone. We're folks who like to be a part of a relationship or a social network. And we, as human beings, we crave support and friendship and love. And those are the kinds of things that give us hope and move us towards recovery. So when you think about how someone's life needs to change by our services or by your practice, think about these 4 domains and whether we're reaching each of them in our practice. Next slide, please. And these are, according to SAMHSA, the different elements that fall into recovery. And they're not alone. They work together, and it could be any one of these, any combo. So in order for someone to move forward on a recovery journey, they need to have some form of hope and belief that that journey is going to be fruitful for them. Recovery is person-driven. It's not driven by the worker. It's your own recovery journey. I remember years ago being taught by a national peer advocate that I couldn't lead someone's recovery journey, that I couldn't sit on their shoulder their whole life and make sure that they were doing what they needed to do for their wellness, that it was their journey. And what I could do was walk side by side with them as they made their recovery journey. So that recovery is person-centered and person-driven, not driven by us. And it occurs many different ways, via many pathways. There's not one road to recovery. As many human beings as there are, that's how many roads there are to recovery. And it's holistic, as we talked about already. It's not just about symptom reduction. It's about a whole life and a sense of health, home, purpose, and community. And you must be supported by peers and allies in order to really journey into recovery, because none of us, again, as I said, are alone. And recovery is supported through those social networks and social relationships. It's also important that it be culturally based and influenced, because we are made up of our backgrounds and who we are and how we see ourselves. And by denying that, we deny our full recovery. We also need to address trauma and the things that folks have gone through in their life. And recovery also involves not just the person, but their family, their community, their strengths, and their responsibilities and the kinds of responsibilities that they want. And recovery is based on respect, and it's based on mutual respect. And a little bit later on, we're going to talk a little bit about practice and how you demonstrate that mutual respect in your practice through power sharing. Next slide, please. This is the way that I like to define recovery. As you can see already, there's a lot of ways to define recovery. I like this one, which is from the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. And I like it because it talks about a satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life despite any limitations that we might find caused by any kind of challenges. And this part of recovery involves the development of new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond the effects of any kind of mental health challenge. Because what we're really talking about in recovery is the fact that we want a life, we know what we want, and we're going to go and get those things. So as practitioners, what we want to do is help someone to achieve the level of success and satisfaction in their life that they're looking for. And that, to me, really defines recovery. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit, now that we've kind of defined recovery, about what the implications are about that for our behavioral health practice. Next slide, please. There are some basic principles that we need to live by if we're going to look at things through a recovery lens. And these principles may be different than what you're used to. They may not be, they may be similar, but they may be very different. They are that we need to believe that recovery is possible for everyone. And there are many people who don't believe that, both the people in recovery and the people working with people in recovery. A lot of folks are believing that recovery is possible for a certain group of people, but not for everyone. And the truth is, we don't know that. We don't know the limitations and possibilities of other human beings, no matter what they're labeled. We're not able to know how far a person could go. And so believing that recovery is possible for everyone is really one of the most important principles behind seeing things through a recovery lens. And I know it sounds easy just to say it, but if you really dig deep into your heart, I think you'll see that it's a little more difficult to really live in that place where you believe that recovery is possible for everyone. It takes a little while to get there, but you can, and it's a great place to be. The next one is that recovery can occur without professional intervention. You know, we as professionals, we like to think that we really are controlling everything, and we're not. Sometimes people get better despite us or without us, and that's something that I think that we just need to face and look at. You know, people are so different. They need many different things, and that's how we can be most helpful to the people that we're working with. And I was taught, because I've been around a long time, that this next one couldn't happen, but it's not true. Recovery involves more than just reducing symptoms. It can occur even though symptoms reoccur. So you know if you're working, if you have any kind of a physical or behavioral health challenge, that your symptoms may come back. I have a physical health challenge, and I get better, and then I get ill, and then I get better, and then I get ill, and it doesn't stop me from working and seeing my friends and doing what I need to do. So that, you know, I've moved on my recovery journey despite the fact that I will still get symptoms. And that just leads to the next principle, which is how highly individualized recovery is. My recovery is different than your recovery. All of it is specialized and individualized. And we can't just homogenize everything as if it's only one intervention. Recovery is also really important that someone be there and stand in and stand by the person. Studies were done quite a while ago in the 1980s about what the most important piece is for someone in recovery. And what do you think that was? What do you think the most important thing was for someone who is moving towards recovery? Well, it was actually the belief of their worker, the person that worked with them, that they could actually recover. That's what helped them most in their journey. And that in itself really shows how people like to work together with other folks and need some hope in their life. And then the last principle is that recovery from the consequences of the illness is sometimes more difficult than the recovering from the illness itself. And if we were face-to-face, I would ask you what you think the consequences of the illness are. And a lot of people talk about, you know, being separated from family, losing their job or dropping out of school, losing a stable place to live, and all those things are true. But the worst consequence of the illness is often poverty. And you'll find that people find themselves in one situation and then all of a sudden they are poor, living on benefits, living alone, not having any sense of their own abilities. And recovering from those kinds of consequences of the illness become very difficult and sometimes last longer than things like symptoms. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for us? Well, it means as a practitioner that just maintaining people is not acceptable anymore. It's not okay to just make somebody, you know, have some base level of functioning and be contented with that. It's also important to know that leaving care may not be a negative thing. It may be a sign of health. Because those people who have a good sense of hope and a good sense of what they want in the community, if we are not helping them get there, then they are leaving. And that may be a sign to us to look at what we're doing, to look at our practice and say, why is this person not leaving? Am I not hearing them? Am I not giving them what they need? You know, the way I was taught years and years ago, that word non-compliance was there, or non-adherence. And that just means that someone doesn't want to do what I want them to do. And that's just not okay. I think it's most important that we hear people and engage with them and try to look at the kinds of things that they're looking to accomplish, not the kinds of things that we're looking to accomplish or that some textbook is telling us to accomplish. It's also important to look that people have a sense of expertise themselves. We're going to talk a little bit later about the shift in focus in our practice when we move to a recovery-based service system. And one of them is there's two experts in the room, not one. It's the practitioner and the person who's receiving services, because we know best what's good for us. The other implication for our practice is that the recovery vision has to be the driving vision for all the different kinds of services. So that when we talk about outcomes, or you'll hear managed care talk about outcomes, you'll hear your supervisors talk about outcomes, the outcome we're looking for is that someone is getting the life that they want. And in order to do that, they may need more than one particular service. And the service that they go to is really driven by what it is they want to achieve. Giving somebody some kind of group therapy for some reason that doesn't get them what they're looking to get is useless. So you want this vision of what the person wants to achieve to drive the kinds of services that they're offering. And as we said before, reducing symptoms is not enough, and it's not even meaningful, because many people function with some degree of some kind of symptom. I know I do, and many of you may as well. We move past whatever symptom we have to get where we need to go. Having said that, the implication of our practice, again, and I've said this quite a few times now, pay attention to the social determinants of health and the consequences of being labeled psychiatrically impaired. Does the person have a stable home? Does the person work or want to work? Have they dropped out of school? Do they want to go back to school? Are they connected to family? Are they dating? Are they seeing their friends? Do they have friends? Are they parenting? And all of those kinds of issues that go along with that full life in the community. And the last implication for our practice touches on what I said in the last slide, which is, I think it's really the most important that we don't lose hope and that we instill hope and belief that change can happen and that it's something positive. Because we're going to talk a little bit more about how hard it is to change, and it's hard for all of us to change. Human beings just don't like change very much in general, and changing is hard and it's scary for folks. And so if we can instill that sense of hope and help people to believe that if they want to change, that they can be successful at it, that our practice will be successful and very recovery-based. Next slide. So I'm big on vision. I think vision's really important. I think that those of us who've worked in this field for a long time, and I have worked in this field for a very long time, we need to hold on to our beliefs and our vision, because the day-to-day can get very tiring, and there's a whole lot of bureaucracy and paperwork and funding issues. And so I think it's really important that I always say, hold on to the brass ring and never let go. And so here, before we move forward, are a few vision statements for you to look at over these beautiful views of our universe through the Hubble telescope. So we want to believe that recovery is possible no matter what circumstances or conditions someone is labeled with. We want to help people to uncover their hopes and dreams. Often when I had visited programs, people will say to me, these folks don't have any hopes and dreams. Well, sometimes our mental health system has beaten the hopes and dreams out of people, and they just have lost them. And our job is to uncover them. They're not gone. They're just a little lost. And I think that if we uncover abandoned hopes and dreams, we are really practicing in a way that's recovery-oriented and practicing in a way that are helping people to move on their recovery journey. And while they're on that journey, people need to rediscover who they are through their culture and their strengths and their values and their skills. No one wants to be and please excuse these words, a chronic mental patient. You know, that's not something we aspire to. We're all people, no matter what we're labeled or what challenges we face. And sometimes when you're in the middle of not feeling well, you forget your personhood. And in our practice in a recovery-based system, we need to help people to rediscover that personhood and rediscover the kinds of things they've always loved to do. It's also important that we re-engage the community with the individual in a way that sustains what they're looking for: home, health, purpose, and community. And in doing that, we re-author the way that we see ourselves and that the people we work with and the people we work for see themselves. And if we think of these visions all together, we could assure that everyone can reclaim a meaningful life role. Because I want to go back to that basic principle that everyone can recover, that recovery is possible, and that means that everyone can reclaim or claim a meaningful life role. Meaningful is the big word here. One that is successful and satisfying to the individual. And those life roles are going to be diverse because we are diverse. And we all want something different in life. So it's important here, again, as we have these visions, we share these visions, that we hear the person who we're working with, and that we hear what's meaningful to them and not what's meaningful to us. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about how we increase the capacity to promote recovery while we're working with folks. Next slide, please. So what do people want from the mental health system? And if we were together, I'd make you all guess. But through the webinar, you see up in front of you, take a minute to look at this. Does it look familiar? Let me ask you, those of you who are out there in webinar land, what do you want from the world? What is it you're looking for from the systems that you interact with? Looks like the same thing, doesn't it? People want a good, stable place to live. People want to be able to go to school. They want a job that's satisfying to them. They want people in their life who care about them and who they care about, who help them enjoy life. And they want help in the time of crisis in the amount that they want, at the time that they want, from the people that they want. And in general, these are the things that folks want in life. So I ask you, does your practice help people to attain these things? Are you working in a way where every time you interact with someone, you're either finding out what they're looking for in these categories, or you're helping them attain them? Give that a little thought. Does your practice, and by that practice by now you figure what I mean. By practice I mean the way that you're working with people. Is it recovery oriented, and does it help people attain the things that they're interested in attaining? Symptoms to see clients in the context of the system, in other words, how they fit into the mental health system. Everything was about deficits and needs and symptoms. And there was one expert in the room, me. I kind of knew what to do, and the person sitting opposite me was less capable than I was. And that's how I was trained. I don't know how many of you were trained that way, but I think that our behavioral health system is getting better. I've seen it get better, but that still is the focus of services in our system. And that is not recovery-based. It's not person-centered, trauma-informed, culturally competent, and recovery-based. What we do, and that change of focus that we need to do all the time, by the way, because it's easy to fall back into the way you're trained. So what we want to do is not focus on somebody's challenges and symptoms. We want to look at a person's uniqueness. What about this person makes them unique? What are the strengths that move them forward towards achieving their goals? We don't want to see people in the context of a system of services. We want to see people in the context of their own life and of their community and their families and their loved ones. We want to help folks to be a part of an engaging community, not a mental health system. We also want to emphasize strengths and gifts and capacities. Everyone has them. Some of them are more visible and some of them are less visible. But what we want to do is emphasize those strengths and gifts and capabilities and capacities and not diminish them and concentrate on the deficits and needs and challenges. And I mentioned this a couple times already. There really are two experts in the room. We know best what's good for us. I'm very lucky in my physical issues to have a doctor who really engages with me about what works for me. And, 90% of the time I do what she suggests. But 10% of the time what she suggests just doesn't work for me. And she's always willing to acknowledge that and but let's look at it and so that we can really kind of have a checklist when we look at ourselves and what we're doing. So what would a recovery practice look like? It looked like all of these kinds of things. So take a good look at them. We're going to go over them a little. Those of you who've met with me before know I like to be very concrete because it's one thing to talk a good line about what this is and what that is and what it looks like. But the real issue is how do I operationalize it? Everyone believes in recovery. Recovery is mom and apple pie. Nobody tells you they don't believe in recovery. But what does it mean when you actually sit down with someone? What does it look like when you're sitting and talking to somebody? So this is what it looks like. And just think about your own practice a little bit while we're reading it. Think about what happens when you meet with someone. Do you focus on the person's life goals and needs? So what are you talking about in that session? Are you talking about, well, I want to go back to school, but it's really hard for me. I have trouble concentrating. So do you start to talk about what it is about going back to school? I really want to get my child back. They don't live with me. What is the person's life goals and needs? And your practice would be talking about that. Do you promote choice? And do you talk about quality of life? And are your approaches to these things individualized? So if you see 3 people in one day, are you talking the same way? Or are you dealing with different issues with different people? If you had a recovery practice, you would be suggesting many different kinds of peer services and supports. Peer support comes in a whole lot of different flavors. And I think that it's really important that we know all the ones that are offered in your area and that you would be suggesting different ways for people to connect up with peer support. You'd also be promoting and facilitating integration into the community. So it's not about the book club at the program, at the behavioral health program. It's about the book club at the library. And if the person is not happy going to the book club at the library, then the discussion would be around what would make you feel comfortable enough to do that. What would make you feel comfortable enough to integrate into the services in the community? And you would have, I often go into programs and I see no schedules of community activities on the wall. Now, how can you help integrate someone into the community if you don't have community bulletin boards up? and what's at the library and what's at the local university. I have a place up in Vermont that my husband and I go to, and the first thing I do when I go there is get the Friday newspaper, which talks about what's happening in the Upper Valley, so that I know what's going on there. So are we promoting and facilitating community integration? You know, are we helping people to see what's there? The other piece is this shared power, which I've alluded to a few times, and that is really about listening and not being the one to have the final word about everything. As a practitioner, it's not for us to get our way. It's for us to offer services that will help the person we're sitting with to be able to get what they want. And one of the things that we want to make sure we do is to set a situation up, to set up an environment in our relationship where the person we're working with feels empowered enough to be able to give us their opinion, to be able to fight with us a little, to be able to have an opinion, to be able to have a goal, and to be able to move forward. And power sharing is something that sometimes we're not so good at as practitioners. And I think it's something to definitely work on, because without it, we don't have that shared focus. We don't have that focus where there's two experts in the room, and that becomes essential. Also, we want to make sure we're talking about wellness and not concentrating on illness. And this next one I always love. Take a look at your rules and regulations in your program. If you have a recovery practice, then you don't have a lot of rules, and you're lots of flexibility about people coming and going through your services. Not if you're in a place where people are locked up or are there by being mandated, but there's choice there as well. But if you are in an outpatient kind of program, there should not be tremendous amount of hoops someone has to jump through to get in and out. Also, a recovery practice looks at other things other than clinical treatment. It looks at healing kinds of things like yoga, shiatsu, music, journaling, meditation, reading, all kinds of things that folks do to be able to heal. And I think the most important thing about a recovery practice, again, is that there would always be that belief that people can recover and be resilient in the face of challenges. The most important thing is that we really believe that people can move forward and that they will move forward. Next slide, please. So let's think about this for a minute. Let's stop and take a minute to think, which is, we've talked about different definitions of recovery. We've talked about what your practice would look like if it were recovery-based. And let's think a little bit about the components of our practice that are recovery-oriented and which might not be. I'm not going to ask you in this kind of situation to tell me which ones are, but I want you to think a little bit when we're off of this webinar. How can my own personal motivation and beliefs facilitate or inhibit the capacity to deliver truly recovery-oriented services? In other words, am I getting in my own way? And what can I do to get out of my own way? So next slide. I'm really sorry these slides are so slow. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but we'll just keep going through. So again, what's stopping you? And it says there, that's right, nothing. Because what is our personal motivation and how do we make this shift? And what's stopping us? Next slide, please. Is anything stopping us? Well, there are some real issues in shifting to recovery services. And I think that it's extremely important that we see those issues and that we are clear about them. Because I think that without that, we won't be able to succeed. So Years ago, before I joined NIAPRS, I was the founding executive director of an outpatient treatment agency that that was not very recovery oriented and pretty small, and we got quite a bit larger and really became totally recovery oriented. And when I spoke with staff about what the most difficult issues were in shifting over to this new way of thinking, because they all were into it. Everyone wanted to. It's not that anyone was having any problems with it. They just wanted to change, but these were the issues. And these were them. This kind of work takes more time than some kind of homogenized, group that's given to people, or some kind of way of sitting together with folks and reading an intake packet. By actually trying to do person-centered work, it takes a lot of time. And the staff who do work this way sometimes feel very alone when they go elsewhere and people don't feel that way. So sometimes you feel like you're always pushing a boulder up a hill, and you're talking recovery and other people are talking symptoms. And so you feel alone. And it is a shift in thinking, not only for you, but for the person you're working with. And so you're constantly thinking and trying to explain what it is that you're doing and how to do it. Also, if you want to be community-oriented, then you got to get out there, and the community is big. And sometimes people live all over the community. So helping people fill their time with real-life activities is, again, person-centered work takes time. It's very time-consuming. Sometimes the community is not as accepting and is not there in the recovery mode. So there you are, feeling alone with the recovery approach again, and having to take a lot of time to try to engage with the community, to understand, to begin to believe what you believe. Also, again, some folks you work with, they may have been in our mental health system for a long time, and they may have really abandoned their hopes and dreams, and you are tasked now with helping them redevelop them and find abandoned hopes and dreams and share them with you and with each other. And that's hard work. Power sharing we talked about, it's not easy. Medication and treatment rules and consequences and liability are real. We're a litigious society. People sue each other. Certain people, like doctors, have legal liability in these kinds of cases, and sometimes people take a safer, what they consider a safer route that may not be in the service of a recovery practice, but it's real. And so the issue here is that we need to just address it and know it exists and talk about it. If we don't talk about it with other staff, then we're going nowhere. Some of you on the webinar today may not be in a position of power in your agencies. That shouldn't stop you. There are ways that you can have your voice be heard in a respectful fashion. You may not get what you want all the time, but someone will be listening to you. I think the rest of them we've talked about. Managing your time when you have this much more work becomes difficult. And all of those things are time-consuming, planning and scheduling activities, and including the people you work with in all aspects of service planning. If you can't get them included above you, make sure they're included in what you're doing. Again, change is easiest from the top down, but you can change from the bottom up. You can change from sideways in and inside out. So the issue is wherever you are is where you want the recovery practice to start. And I caution you to not get disappointed and frustrated by not being able to have someone above you agree with you or below you agree with you. The point is, start with you. Start with you and move forward and begin to shift. And when the good outcomes come, other folks will see what you're doing and join forces with you. Next slide, please. So why should we bother to do this? Well, not just because I'm telling you to or that your boss is telling you to, but when you move your practice in this way, people actually get better. They really work harder for something that they want. I'm sure you've seen this. I'm sure it's the same for you. When I want something, I work harder to get there, much harder than if someone else wants it and I'm just doing it for them. It's very good for staff. If any of you are supervisors out there, this feeling that you're in charge of everything and everybody, it's very burdensome, and it wears on you after a while, and people leave jobs for that reason. But when you share power with each other and with the people you work with, it reduces the burden on us individually, and staff retention actually improves, and we feel much better about our jobs. So staff rediscover and follow their dreams and realize why they went into this work. And participants rediscover and follow their dreams. And that feeds off each other. Because when the staff feel better, then the participants feel better. And when the participants start meeting their goals, then the staff feel better. So all in all, this shift to recovery helps us to really work better together and feel better about the work that we're doing. On a management level, from a management perspective, the funding and the managed care and supports are all for wellness services and for flexible and open services for treatment and rehabilitation. They are interested in funding recovery services because recovery services have better outcomes. The bottom line is, for those of you who have been doing this, you will agree with me. For those of you who haven't started yet, I hope you will just hear what I'm saying, which is I've been doing this for a long time, and recovery practice works. People rediscover themselves, they find a life that they want to live, and they move forward with it. And that alone is a reason to shift. Next slide, please. We do have some challenges, and I want to make sure I throw them on the table and that you see them really clearly, because nothing that's worth doing doesn't have a few challenges. And so it's important that we learn and sustain our belief in recovery for everyone, not just those whose gifts are more visible, but even for those whose gifts may be less visible. We want to make sure that as supervisors that we train and sustain staff competencies. So we can't just say, everyone, go ahead and shift your practice. We have to teach people how. There's a real way to do work that's person-centered, and we can't expect our staff to just do that because they believe in it. We have to change business as usual. We need to be able to listen and engage with people in a different way. This really is different. When you think about it, it may not seem different to you now, but when you think about it, you're going to realize that it's not exactly the way that we used to do business. And so be open to that change yourselves. It's really important to develop recovery-oriented outcomes. The outcomes that most people look for in our field are about symptom reduction and reduction of use of inpatient hospital and reduction in bed days and reduction in ER visits. But I'm not looking for that. I'm looking at increase in jobs, more people who date and marry, more folks who are raising their children, people who are in stable housing, people who are going back to school, people who are joining up in community life. So let's look at those recovery-oriented outcomes. And also, we want to prepare for new populations, partners, and payers. You know, Washington is shifting as New York has shifted. There's different folks behind the money now. And people who give money ask for something in return. They ask for an outcome. Let's check out what those outcomes are and make sure that our practice is giving people the outcomes they're looking for so that we can continue to be funded for the kind of work that's recovery-oriented and recovery-based. And my last one is be bold in the face of change, because you know what? Change is hard for the folks we work with, and change is hard for us. Remember that change is not easy for people, and we want to make sure that everyone has the support they need to move forward. Next slide. Before I talk a little bit about readiness, I'm going to read this to you because it's always hard for me to read this without crying because it's really so touching. But Patricia Deegan is a wonderful advocate, peer advocate, and she's also a beautiful writer. And any time that you can get to read anything that she's written, please do. She's all over the internet. She has a website herself, and she is extremely well-spoken and right on the money. So for this one, she says, it's our job to ask people with psychiatric disabilities what it is they want and need in order to grow, and then to provide them with good soil in which a new life can secure its roots. And this is sometimes hard for us, the next one, but it's the most important. And then it's our job to wait patiently, to sit with, to watch with wonder, and to witness with reverence the unfolding of another person's life. Because that is what we're doing with a recovery-oriented practice. We are not unfolding their life. We are not instilling something in them. What we're doing is creating that good soil. We're creating that environment where people can begin to feel like people again, where someone can feel like a respected, meaningful human being who can grow and prosper and unfold with their hopes and dreams and unfold their life. And we get to watch that, which is really a gift. Next slide, please. So you remember I told you two things. I told you that I love to be concrete, and I told you that it's hard to change. Some folks don't like to change, and other folks love to change. I love change. I love to change, move my furniture around. I get tired of my clothes. I change my screen on my computer every 2 months or every month. But some folks hate to change. My husband, he still has a long ponytail and a beard. He just still doesn't like to change. Some of you may like to change and some of you may not. But if you don't like to change, change can be very difficult and you may not be ready to change. So next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about how you might determine if you're ready to change or if someone is ready to change. So I learned this wonderful thing from the Center for Psych Rehab, and it's called a Psychiatric Rehabilitation Readiness Assessment. And what it actually is for is to assess if someone is ready to engage in a rehabilitation process. I used it from a management perspective to see if my agency that I was in charge of was ready to change. And it worked for me as well. And we're going to go over all 5 of these areas for just a very quick minute. So, you know, it's about dissatisfaction or need for change, a commitment to change, an awareness of what's around us, an awareness of who we are, and an ability to connect with somebody. So next slide, and we'll go over these one by one. So the first one is this dissatisfaction, need for change. Without some form of dissatisfaction, change really never occurs. Think about yourself. You know, how many times do you move forward? Do you move forward if there's no dissatisfaction? Now, we could say there could be an internal need or an external pressure. So it could be that you just know you don't like it the way it is and you want it to be different. Or it could be that there's a new funding stream, or that your boss is making you change, or something from the outside environment feels that need to change and brings pressure on you. So the way that you do this with the person you're working with is you engage in a conversation that gets at these issues. So you start asking questions about their dissatisfaction with their current situation. You know, so you're getting out of the hospital. Do you like where you live? Because every time you're back there, you seem to wind up back in the hospital. Do you like it? What about it do you like? You know, you begin to explore the issues around dissatisfaction. Next slide, please. The next one is called commitment to change, but what it really means is that the person themselves believes that the change that will happen is going to be good and that they could actually do it, and that once they do it, that it's going to be continued. Because nobody wants to change if they think that they're going to be battered for it, or if that once they make that change, no one's going to support them. So it's really important that you then begin to explore this commitment to change. This is a huge one in what stops people from changing. People could have a real dissatisfaction and a real understanding of where they want to go and what's out there, and they could just believe that that change is going to be meaningless to them, and that no matter what happens, they're still going to feel and act exactly the same. If that's the case, then they're not going to move forward. Next, please. The next one is about knowing what's out there. Sometimes people want to change, they're dissatisfied, they believe the change would be good, but they have no idea. They've never lived in the outside of an apartment, so they don't know. If you start to ask them about houses, they don't know what a house is, they don't know what it's like to be in the country, they've only lived in the city. So you would begin to talk with folks about identifying and talking about the different things that might be in their future if they changed. What would it look like? And someone who is really environmentally aware would be able to talk to you about the people, places, and activities that made up what went on in the past and what might happen in the future. And those who don't would not really understand what other options are out there. Next, please. The next piece that's important is self-awareness. And I think that that this also sort of is just what it says. It's can you describe your own interests, values, and the way that you make choices? Many of us have, have been able to, we've had many jobs, we've lived in many places, and so we kind of know what we like. We know we like the city, we know we like the country, we like the garden, we hate the garden. We understand why we like and dislike things. I live in two places that are snowy and I hate the snow. But that's a whole nother point. But at least I know I hate the snow. I'm self-aware. And you look at the past experience of making choices and you understand why you made those choices. So I know I hate the snow, but I know I have a house in Vermont and I know why. So at least I'm aware of what it is. I think that, again, you engage in conversation with people and you begin to see how much they do understand about why they make the choices that they make. And next slide, please. And the last one really is about personal closeness, which is the ability to connect and engage. Go through this, or I often will say to my staff, go ahead and give it a try, because I'd be right there. If you fall down, I'll be right there to help you, help you get back up. That sense of being able to know that someone can be there for you helps you to engage in that change. So next slide, please. So this issue about the readiness assessment is really just a guide for you. You have it on the slides. The guide is that that as you're engaging with someone who you're working with, and you're finding that they're reticent to make a change, have your discussions be those areas to start talking about. Let's say the person is really low in environmental awareness. They just do not know what options are out there. Start exploring those options with them. Start looking at videos. Go on the internet. Take the person out with you to look at different kinds of places. Bring people in to talk about different kinds of things. Depending upon what your work environment is like, whether you can go out or you have to bring people in, but there's so much now on the internet, there's so many virtual things we can do. Begin to explore with people what those things are. If someone is low on self-awareness, start doing values work with them. What do you think of this? What are your values on that? You can get all kinds of exercises and deal with all kinds of ways of helping people to really kind of increase their readiness to change. Because the change can be scary if we do not feel like we're accompanied by someone and if we don't understand those different issues. And so before I begin to wrap up, I want to leave you with this wonderful Nelson Mandela quote. Remember, I talked about vision and how important vision is. And I talked about action and how important it is to operationalize our vision. But action without vision is only passing time. And vision without action is merely daydreaming. But vision and action together can change the world. And I think that we can change the world together with the people that we work with. And it's important that we keep our vision and that we learn ways to act that are recovery-based. And I think that the idea for today's hour was to really think about how we can move our practice to something that is recovery-based so that we can take that vision that we have and apply some real action to it and change the world. And I think you all can do that if you put your minds to it. So next slide, please. It's coming. I see it in the background. There we go. So let's move to action. We have our vision. Let's move to action and create change. So considering what you've learned today and what we've talked about, I want you to think a little bit about something that you can do in 1 week, and then in 3 months, and then in a year. All of us can walk out of this webinar now and do one thing this week that we think will help change. Does anybody want to put it in the chat room? Go to that chat on the side and see if there is anything that they think they can do. Is there a new group you can run? Is there a different way that you can engage with someone? Is there someone who hasn't been talking who you could think of a new way of interacting with? What do you think? Is there anyone who wants to jump in? So think about it. Think about what kind of thing would be possible for you to do in 1 week. Could you change something in your environment? Could you put up a welcome sign at your front door? Could you get some stories of recovery and hang them on the walls? Could you go to the local library and get a schedule of what's going on that week and bring it back and post it in your program? These are all things that can be done tomorrow. And what could you do in 3 months? And what could happen in a year? Could you form a transformation team in a year that would look at all your policies and procedures and see if they're flexible and welcoming and open and recovery-based and person-centered? That's something you could do in a year. So think about it. Think about the kinds of things that you could do. And for each of those 3 changes, think about the first step that you'll take to support that change. Because everything starts with a first step. So I gave you, if there are any questions, you could write them in the question box, and I would be happy to answer them. If not, this will be available recorded, and also the slides will be available to you, and I can always be reached. You have my email, and I can always be reached at a different time to answer any of your questions. I would be happy to do that as well. Someone has said that it actually should be the centerpiece of treatment, and I agree with you. You know, recovery should be the center of treatment. And I do have a question. I mentioned the limitations of working with a population that is not voluntary. What limitations might we face with the recovery model, and how might we overcome them, I think. Sorry, I'm really having trouble with our technology today. I apologize. You know, I used to, when I ran my agency, I had a woman who oversaw our substance use programs, and we worked a lot with mandated people. And she said people always have a choice, even when they're mandated. You know, they could choose to go to prison. They could choose to come to program. They can choose to work on their recovery. They can choose not to. And I think the issue with people who are not in a voluntary situation is for us to realize and speak up about the fact that they're not voluntary. By putting a sort of blanket over it, it doesn't help. We know you're here against your will. We understand that. But that doesn't stop us from treating you respectfully and from helping you get the life that you want when you get out of here. So for those people not voluntary, I would move towards what will life look like when you are back being able to not be here involuntarily. And I think that is the best way to move past that. And then working in a person-centered, recovery-oriented manner with everyone, whether they are mandated or not, is essential. So you can still work with the person in a recovery-oriented way, and then you're upfront about the fact that they are there against their will, and you're also looking at what life will look like after they get out. I hope that answered your question, Mark. I guess it did. Any other questions before we close up? What about something you're going to do when you hang up the phone in the first week? Anybody else want to share something? How are you going to operationalize this? Is anyone going to use that readiness assessment in their conversation? Do you think that's useful? Because I found it tremendously useful in trying to move my whole organization towards a recovery perspective. You know, I could see where people needed to have their readiness develop, and we were able then to make the shift very painlessly because we waited and helped folks to get ready for change. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening today and for participating. I hope that you all will go out today after we shut down and think about one thing that you can do this week to move your practice to a recovery-oriented practice, because I know you can. And it's been my pleasure to speak with you today. Next week, on the 18th of December at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific, Ruth Cologne Wagner will be speaking to you about recovery in action. She'll be talking with you about more ways to actually go out and provide recovery-oriented practice. So please join us again at 10 a.m. next Tuesday, and we'll be happy to speak with you again. And have a lovely day today, and thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.